The movie starts with Lex holding a shard of kryptonite and lamenting to his personal assistant Mercy how much it cost him to mine the crystal from space and noting how scarce kryptonite is. He says that the only way he can compete with Superman is to also become a superhero, and that is the reason for the Lex 9000 satellite launched into space. He says the satellite will destroy meteors and defend the Earth from alien attacks. A meteor is moving through space and suddenly takes a sharp turn towards the Earth. The scientists at Lex Labs note this and try to destroy the meteor with blasts from the Lex 9000, but they miss, and the meteor enters the Earth's atmosphere. The meteor heads for Lex Labs and the scientists evacuate the lab. The meteor crashes at the lab and Brainiac comes out of the crater and goes into the lab. He connects himself to the supercomputer at the lab and starts absorbing data. Back on the Daily Planet, Perry comes out of the office and tells his journalists about Brainiac's attack, saying one of them should go and cover the story. Lois Lane says she will cover the story and goes into the men's restroom to drag Jimmy out, and they drive to Lex Labs. Clark Kent also hears about Brainiac's attack and changes into his Superman costume and flies out. Lex is told that Brainiac has attacked Lex Labs, and he tells Mercy to prepare a car for them to go there. Superman gets to Lex Labs and Brainiac launches a missile at Metropolis. Superman flies off to stop the missile and passes by Jimmy and Lois. Seeing this, Lois decides to drive to a telephone tower. Superman catches the missile mid-air and throws it into the ocean. Then he flies back to Lex Labs. Lois climbs a telephone tower so as to get better coverage of what's going on at Lex Labs, ignoring Jimmy's warnings. Lex watches the fight between Brainiac and Superman in his car. Superman fights Brainiac at Lex Labs. Brainiac hijacks the Lex 9000 and consistently attacks Superman with its laser beams. The laser beams hit the telephone tower Lois is on, and the tower starts to collapse, with Lois barely hanging onto it. Jimmy shouts out to Superman to help Lois. Superman uses his freeze breath to freeze Brainiac and punches him, breaking him in pieces, then goes to save Lois. Lex picks up a panel from Brainiac's destroyed body and hides it in his pocket. Lois, Jimmy, and Superman arrive and question him about why Lex 9000 wasn't able to destroy Brainiac before it entered the Earth's atmosphere. But Lex brushes the question off, asking about the person that's going to pay him for damages. Later at the Daily Planet, Jimmy checks the pictures he took, mostly admiring Lex's personal assistant Mercy in the pictures. Lois comes from behind him and tells him that she'll eat him alive, but she tells him that Sarah, the food critic of the Daily Planet, likes him, but Jimmy tells her that he doesn't and then talks about how Lois only has eyes for Superman. Clark joins the conversation and Lois excuses herself, saying she has to write about Superman. Clark goes to Smallville for the weekend and talks with Martha and Jonathan about how much he likes Lois but is afraid of telling her his secret, as that would put her in danger. They tell him to follow his heart. Lex revives Brainiac's panel and forms an alliance with him. They agree that they will destroy Superman and Lex will use his robot suit to drive Brainiac out of Earth, boosting his reputation. Brainiac tells him that he is a biotechnic life form and needs access to technology to rebuild his body. Lex builds a rocket and puts Brainiac's panel inside, along with the shard of kryptonite with him and a DNA sample of Superman, gotten from when Superman fought Brainiac. Lex launches the rocket, and Brainiac merges with the Lex 9000 satellite and morphs into a giant robot. Brainiac starts moving into the Earth's atmosphere. Clark tries to talk with Lois at work, but other things seem to get in the way, like emergencies, and she leaves to cover the stories. Sarah also tries to get Jimmy's attention, but he avoids her. Perry offers Clark a position as an international journalist, but Clark is reluctant to accept it. After closing for the day, Clark bids Jimmy and Lois a good night, but before he can leave, Perry comes out of his office and tells him that Sarah called in sick, and he needs Clark to cover for her on a restaurant review that night. He tells Lois to go with Clark as it is a reservation for two. Clark admires Lois as they have dinner. He finds himself wanting to tell her that he is Superman, but he holds himself back. Brainiac scans for Superman's DNA and finally locates him at the restaurant. He yells out "Son of Krypton" before crashing into the restaurant. Clark super speeds out and changes into his Superman costume, then flies towards Brainiac. They fight from building to building. Lois looks for Clark, but can't find him. She calls Perry to send her a photographer, and then decides to take pictures of the fight with her phone camera. She goes to the top of a building and starts taking pictures. Superman is hit multiple times by beams from a weapon Brainiac fashioned from the kryptonite shard that Lex gave him, leaving Superman weakened. In their fight, the beam also hits Lois and leaves her unconscious. Superman sees this and angrily charges at Brainiac, uses his hit vision on him, and slams him through a building, knocking him out. Superman goes to carry Lois and takes her to the hospital. Brainiac regains consciousness and flies off with his battered body to look for technology to repair it. The doctor tells Perry, Jimmy, and Clark that a certain metal is fusing with Lois's blood and she doesn't have much time to live. Clark gets a sample of Lois's blood from the lab and goes to the Fortress of Solitude. He analyzes Lois's blood and asks for the computer a way to help her. The computer tells him that the only way to help her is to get argonium-44, which is at the center of the Phantom Zone. Brainiac tracks Superman to the Fortress of Solitude and fights him. He then tries to absorb Krypton's data from the computer, but Superman activates a self-destructive sequence. The fortress blows up, but Brainiac escapes. He scans the area for Superman's signature, but he gets no feedback, leaving him to conclude that Superman is dead. Superman arrives at the Phantom Zone and is attacked by a creature, but he quickly defeats it and continues his journey. The world starts to notice Superman's disappearance, and Lex happily concludes that Brainiac must have killed him and tells Mercy to arrange a tiki party. Superman gets to the center of the Phantom Zone and heals himself with argonium-44. He then gets some in a test tube and starts flying back. He arrives at Metropolis and goes to the hospital where he pours argonium-44 on Lois and heals her. He then tells her that he will reveal his identity to her as Clark. Perry asks Jimmy to go to the Lex party to cover the story, as he is short on staff. Lex holds a party and is giving his speech when Brainiac arrives at the city and starts destroying it. Lex says that the Man of Steel is absent, leaving him to step up, and says the media should meet him at the base of the building in 5 minutes. Jimmy asks himself what Lois would do and decides to get another angle on things. He sneaks into Lex's building and listens in on Lex's conversation with Mercy, then figures out that Lex is working with Brainiac. Lex goes and puts on one of his armor suits, then heads to fight Brainiac. Brainiac quickly beats him. Lex reminds him of their agreement, but Brainiac says that he would never give Earth up. And Lex says that he knew he wouldn't, and that's why he put self-destructive technology in Brainiac's rocket when he sent him to merge with Lex 9000. Lex presses the self-destruct button, but nothing happens. Brainiac laughs and tells him that his system detected the technology and removed it. Jimmy takes pictures trying to find evidence against Lex, when Mercy sees him and asks for the camera film. She starts to beat him, but he manages to run from her. Mercy finds him and takes the camera from him. Jimmy puts on one of Lex's robot suits and knocks Mercy out, but he destroys his camera in the process. Brainiac smashes Lex to the ground and resumes destroying Metropolis. Clark is pushing Lois out of the hospital with a wheelchair, and she tells him to stop being a superhero so that they can be together and nothing else matters. Superman figures that Lois won't say something like that, and then realizes that he is still in the Phantom Zone. He snaps back to reality and sees himself held back by phantoms. He frees himself and flies into Metropolis. Superman sees Brainiac destroying buildings and decides to go fight him before going to heal Lois. Brainiac shoots Superman with a kryptonite beam and is shocked that Superman is unaffected. Superman defeats Brainiac and goes to the hospital. He takes out the argonium-44, but before he could pour it on Lois, Brainiac tracked him to the hospital, snatches it from him, and destroys it. Superman tears Brainiac into pieces and destroys his panel. He goes back inside the hospital and kisses Lois. This heals Lois and she opens her eyes. Superman embraces her but doesn't disclose his identity. Superman goes back to the Fortress of Solitude and sees a part of his computer. He picks it up, and the computer identifies him and greets him. The computer asks Lois about her health, and he tells her that she is fine, but says that Clark Kent has to quit the Daily Planet for the safety of Lois. He says he will build back the Fortress of Solitude with the computer's help. Lois and Perry go to visit Jimmy in his ward, and Sarah brings him cheeseburgers and chili fries, which Jimmy appreciates. Perry is pushing Lois out of the hospital on a wheelchair when they meet Clark at the door, who offers her flowers. Clark is about to quit when Perry receives a call about Mr. Mixapilton causing trouble in the city. Lois leaps out of the wheelchair and runs to call a taxi, saying that she will cover the story. Clark figures that Lois will always be in danger, not because of him, but because of how she lives, and decides not to quit. He runs into an alley and changes into Superman's costume. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. If you like this video, please consider subscribing to our channel. I'll be back with another interesting movie recap. Until then, take care.